Today we're going to talk about factoring for Module 5. This first page is a great summary. It's really important that you do practice each section, but also practice putting all of the ideas together. So the first 3 steps that are written down are true and should be used on every single section that you do for factoring. Always pull the GCF out first. That's really important. The directions will say factor completely. So the GCF has to be pulled out, but it also makes the problem easier if you've pulled it out to start off by doing that as your first step. You also need to make sure your order is correct. What I mean by that is descending order if there's one variable. If there's 2 variables involved, for example, an x squared and a y squared, you want the squared terms on the outside and the combination in the middle. And then the next question you're going to ask yourself is, how many terms do you have? That's going to lead you in the correct direction of what to use. So first, if you have 4 terms, you're going to factor by grouping, which we'll be going over in a second. If it's trinomials, these are the ones that are going to be the most challenging for most of y'all. So you have to decide which technique. They will show you 2 techniques in this section, in this module. And it doesn't matter which one you decide to use. Trial and error is the preferred method, but if you struggle with that or if you've struggled in the past, the AC method is perfectly fine. No one will mark you wrong for using these methods. It's just as you go on in math classes higher up, they will tend to use only trial and error. If you have learned how to use tic-tac-toe and some of those other methods, we're never going to tell you you can't use a different method that you've got down, but please don't ask us to explain a different technique. These are the 2 that we want you to choose from. Special cases, if it's a trinomial that is a perfect square, and you'll notice that the first is a perfect square and the last is a perfect square. And then the binomials, which means 2 terms. For this class, you're going to only deal with difference of squares, and which you saw in Module 4, going in the opposite direction. If you go on to intermediate algebra, you're going to deal with cubes as well. So the first 2 that we're going to deal with are factor by grouping problems. But again, please get in the habit. Write down GCF beside your problem so that you don't forget to do that first. So we scan all 4 and there's no GCF. So when we see 4 terms, we're factoring by grouping. So I want you to underline the pairs that you're going to be looking at, because we're now going to use the distributive property and factor out GCFs of the pairs. So out of the first pair, 3x cubed minus 6x squared, we can pull out a 3 and an x squared. Be careful. What goes inside the parentheses is what's left over. So we're left with an x minus 2. Whatever the middle sign is has to come down, always. So now we're going to look at the second pair, and we look at x plus 2. There's nothing in common there, but this is a mistake people make. They don't put anything out in front of that parentheses. Please always put a 1 as that placeholder, because it's going to help the next step. This is where y'all have got to be careful. Some of y'all would look at that and go, okay, I have an x plus 2 left. But you should notice right now that the parentheses don't match. That's going to tell you you did something wrong. So we pulled out a negative 1, which actually made it an x minus 2 because it changed both signs. Double check, that's a negative x plus 2 if we were to distribute it. The parentheses have to match to go further. These 2, and I always box them, have to match. We are basically doing backwards FOIL now. We are factoring out what matched, which was the x minus 2. We only write it 1 time because we're factoring out. What's left over goes into the first parentheses. So the 3x squared and the minus 1. My answer is 3x squared minus 1 times x minus 2. It doesn't matter if you had changed the order of those 2, meaning that you can actually have the x minus 2 first, but the signs are very important, and you cannot do factor by grouping unless the parentheses match. So looking at number 2, first thing, look across, there's no GCF. So we're going to underline our pairs. Out of the first pair, I can pull out a 5x I'm going to be left with a y minus 3. Always bring your sign down. Out of this second pair, I can pull out a 6. Be careful, we pulled out actually a minus 6, so there's a y minus 3 left. If you had forgotten that, they won't match, and that will catch your mistake. So I boxed what matches, which is the y minus 3. I'm going to pull that out at the back of my factoring, and what's left over, which is not boxed, the 5x minus 6. That is my answer. Remember, for every one of these problems on this test, you can check yourself by foiling it back out. So you can guarantee what you got was correct. So I know on homework, most of y'all aren't going to do that, but on a test, please do it. Signs matter. Signs mean the problem is wrong if you do not have them correct. It's the idea of if I have a -2 and a +2, they're different locations. So very, very important on that piece. So this is factor by grouping 4 terms. We're going to next start on our trinomials.